Hello, and welcome to Happy Horror Time. My name is Tim Murdoch.
And my name is Matt Emmert. Now, today's special guest has written, directed, and produced a variety of horror films over the last 25 years, from slasher flicks to films based on the writings of H.P. Lovecraft to even true crime thrillers. His latest movie, based on serial killer Ed Kemper, was just released in select theaters and on VOD earlier this month. And when it comes to true crime, this is just the beginning for him, as he's got two more films based on serial killers in the works. Please welcome to the podcast the co-writer, producer, and director of Ed Kemper, Chad Ferrin. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for appearing on the show. And first off, congrats on the release of this film. We got a chance to see it and we really enjoyed it. We always ask people, we take it back to the very beginning. And I did hear you mention on a podcast that you grew up on a farm in Minnesota. So I've got to know, what was that like? And how or when did you first become interested in making movies?
Oh, it was amazing, really. I mean, my love of nature, animals, isolation, it all kind of combined to falling in love with cinema because you were in this kind of boring, to say the least, middle of nowhere. And I just, my parents got a Betamax when I was a kid, and I was able to watch and rent whatever I wanted. And, while they were working, I'd be, glued to the TV watching 4 or 5 movies a day, or Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Outer Limits, all these great shows. Just, that was my babysitter. And it was just something that I immersed myself in just to as a form of escapism, I guess. And because, the brutal winters of Minnesota and the being kind of a loner, I was, just kind of found a friend in cinema. And it was one of those things where I wanted at first to become a police officer because I was so in love with film noir and crime and all these things. But in reality, it was cinema, a field of, working in film that I wanted to do. And when I discovered that at 16, it was kind of narrowing that down and trying to write scripts and, working at a movie theater, video store, all these different things that were film related that I just, I knew what I wanted to do. And a babysitter I had when I was very little named Lori.
Laurie Strode.
Laurie Strode. No, Lori Bell was her name, and she married a producer out in Hollywood named Mike Leahy. And I told my mother when I was 20 years old, I'm like, I got to make movies. Let me see what I can do. She called up Lori's brother, who was a car dealer, and he's like, hey, let me call Lori. Let's see if Mike's got anything for Chad. And they're like, hey, we're doing The Prophecy with, Christopher Walken. If he wants to come out and be a production assistant on it, he's welcome to. So I loaded up my car, drove out there, and I've been here ever since,
Oh my gosh. I saw The Prophecy when it came out. I was working at a movie theater when The Prophecy came out. So I saw that movie, yeah.
Wouldn't it be funny if you're like, I was a production assistant?
I'm a production assistant. Why did you talk to me?
That was you?
Yeah. But that's such a cool story that you have a connections. I feel like are everything.
Oh my
in
gosh.
This industry, yeah.
And growing up you mentioned the Twilight Zone, but was there a film that really had an impact on you?
A horror film specifically, because we always
I consider it a horror film. Quest for Fire. My father took me to that, and the nudity, the blood, the violence. I mean, it just I was 5 years old, and it's hitting me like a Mack truck, and it was just one of those things where the visuals and the violence and the nudity were just so in your face that I was kind of like, okay, this is what I like.
We've never had anyone say that film before.
Yeah, we asked that. It's we have certain questions we ask all of our guests, and usually it's if horror movies even factored into their
some
youth.
People are like,
sure.
Yeah, but we figured with you, we could just tell horror movies were a part of your youth, but which made the biggest impact? And we've heard The Exorcist a million times.
Number one.
Jaws would be number 2. And what else do we hear a lot?
Psycho?
Sometimes, yeah. The big ones, obviously.
Sure.
Thank you for the unique answer.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things, and I think that's the great thing about a movie theater, and especially a movie theater experience in the 70s or 80s or whatever. It was just so... they'd let anybody in, and you'd be in there alone with your dad at an afternoon show, and it's just you're seeing all this stuff that you've never seen before, the nudity, the blood, the guts, and you're just like, wow, this is amazing. And it's just it was the right age, the right time, and it just stuck in my head. So it's still vibrant to this day. 50 odd years later, 50 years later almost. So it's amazing that that experience and that thing is something that I've strived to give someone else in the audience all these years, and you hope that you can make an impact, whether it's a scene or a shot or whatever it is, or an entire movie that sticks with people and makes them, makes an impact.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, because we constantly talk about the horror films that shaped our opinion of the entire genre that we saw as kids. And that's when it does. And they do stick with you. It's like we revisit films that we saw when we were young. And sometimes as adults, we're like, why did we like that so much?
Oh, yeah.
We still
sometimes when you revisit a film as an adult, you're like, it's first off, it's slow, not that great. Horribly acted.
But you know what? I still love it.
I still love it.
It appealed in some way. Anyway, one of the things I read about you while we did some research on you is that when you first kind of broke into the industry, you were working as a production assistant. And I saw that you worked on films like Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, and Hellraiser, Bloodlines. So look, I'm big surprise from my shirt. I'm a huge Halloween series fan. And I know specifically The Curse of Michael Myers, there was a lot of chaos going on with that film because like there resulted in rewrites and reshoots. So I just wanted to ask, like, what was that experience like, and how close were you to all of that chaos, or did you see it going on, or what was that like?
Well, that's the interesting thing. It was already shot and done, and the company Neo Motion Pictures that I worked for, that Mike was the producer at, they basically worked in touch with Miramax and Weinstein and Dimension, and they were brought on, and I was brought on for the reshoot scenes. And it was like 4 days here in LA that they did pickup shots and different inserts of murders and different things that Joe Chappelle directed for these pickup shots. Same thing with Hellraiser. So it was basically for pickup scenes. So I didn't get to see the chaos of on set and the drama of that. It was more of just a finely tuned, watching Gary Tunnicliffe doing the makeup and all, picking up, Doug Bradley or, whatever it might be from the airport. Things like that. It was an amazing experience for a 22-year-old kid, just, working with, Pinhead or, on the set of, where Michael Myers is going to be, just for the few days that it was. And it was just, amazing, and something that it's just, you don't appreciate it when you're that at the time. And it's just an exciting thing. But looking back, it's like, oh man, every horror fan should experience something like this. It was phenomenal.
So you did 4 days on Halloween. How many days did you do on Hellraiser?
It was the same. It was like, they had 4 days scheduled to pick up shots here in LA, and it was either at a stage or, whatever, the back yard of whatever they needed to grab these insert shots that were missing from the actual shoot.
No, that makes sense. And then I heard that your very first feature film, Unspeakable, was in the Cannes Film Festival, which is pretty amazing. Like, how did that end up happening?
Well, it was, Troma picked it up, and they did some of the, they paid for the cost to finish post-production, the sound mix and all that stuff. And then they were like, well, let's take it to Cannes. We're going to sell it. And they're like, do you want to come with? And I'm like, well, of course. So they flew me out to Cannes, put me up. I fell in love with this beautiful French girl. It was really, I ended up staying an extra month. I just kept extending my ticket for the return because I was having such an amazing time. And, I thought, if this is what making movies is about, this is amazing. And it's never been that great since, but that was an experience of a lifetime and something that it was really phenomenal. And, the ups and downs that I've had with Troma, that was one thing that, a life experience that is worth more than any money could ever be, or any, it was phenomenal.
Uh-huh.
And for the past decade, you've had a film come out every single year. How are you able to do that?
It's part of it's luck. Part of it is, I hate to say even talent has really anything to do with this business. It's really more tenacity is more important. And if you love what you're doing and you just stick your nose to the grindstone and keep doing it, there's certain people you'll meet along the way that kind of feel that same way, and they'll throw you a few bucks, or they'll, have a script, or they'll have, a location or something that can work, with the limited budget that you might have, or, it just is. I've been lucky that it kind of fell into place for each thing. Someone will, on the deep ones, the first Lovecraft film I did, it all started with, one of the investors had a beach house. So the minute she said beach and ocean, I started thinking of Lovecraft, and it clicked, and the script came out, and we went and shot, things that, you kind of write around you got, whether it's a location or a certain amount of money or whatever it is. Okay, we got 50 grand. Okay, let's do one location. Let's do this. Let's do that. And it just kind of, I've been just open-minded to whatever the situation might arise. Whether if it's a $10,000 movie or a $200,000 movie, I'm open to making that work and having fun doing it. And hopefully, the people I hire and the cast and the crew also have that same gung-ho, no giving a shit attitude, and they roll with it. We all have a good time.
But that's such a great answer, though, because like when you think about it, it's like obviously the people who are the most passionate about making films, whether it's horror, whatever, and people who are just go ahead and do whatever they can with whatever they've got, like those are the people that are going to get the films done. And it feels like it's very inspiring to hear you say that. I'm sure that a lot of like first-time filmmakers or people that don't work with huge studios, that is really inspiring, because I mean, it's almost like manifesting what you want to happen. It's like, I want to do this. I'm going to make sure it happens. I don't care how much money I have or what location, but I'm going to figure out something that can work with what I have. So that's really cool to hear.
Because I think a lot of, especially first-time filmmakers, whatever, they think they're making the greatest film ever made. And, I lost that thought.
You lost it during the prophecy.
It's the fact that you get it done and you get it out there is, to me, whether it makes a dime or whether it, gets all these awards, you got it done, you got it out there, and you move on to the next one. The negativity or the positivity of previous film does not affect me in the least, because I'm on to 3 other films, whether it's mentally or physically. I'm just keep going, and I don't let the bad reviews or the good reviews or the festival rejections or the acceptance affect me in any way, shape, or form, because I've moved on to something else. So you're shielded from any negativity, but it's a double-edged sword, because the positivity also just kind of rolls off your back at that point. Because you're just like, I'm on to something else.
But
that's
like
a great attitude.
I was just going to say, I wish I had that attitude when it came to life. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, but I see what you're saying. It is a double-edged sword, because it's like, you don't want to ignore the compliments and you do want to celebrate the wins, but it's definitely healthy to ignore the negativity, especially in today's age where everybody with a computer.
This is what I would do. I would have a hit and then sit around for 2 years.
And just hang out. Yeah. I would have extended that trip in France that you had for 50 years.
Yeah.
I'd still be there.
Yeah. So we saw that you directed a horror comedy in 2019 called Exorcism at 60,000 Feet, which starred a bunch of big names in horror like Adrienne Barbeau, Lance Henriksen, Bill Moseley, Kelly Maroney. What was it like directing all of these horror greats?
Oh, it was great. It was one of those, once in a lifetime kind of opportunities. And Robert Ryan, it was his baby and his dream. And I had worked with him on a film called Parasites, and we had a good connection, and he's like hired me to direct it. And it was, I was involved with the casting, and he'd say, hey, what about this person? I'm like, oh, of course. And Lance Henriksen, come on, let's do it. So, it was just a joy from every moment to, in post to finishing, and everything was just fun about it. There was nothing negative. It was really amazing. And working with people that you admire, whether it's Bill Moseley or Adrienne Barbeau, it was just amazing. You're like, this is the top of the heap, for me. And that's the whole thing of, my dream of, becoming Stanley Kubrick, 50 years or 20 years ago dissipated long ago, and I accepted what comes to me. And treat each thing and everything project, whether it's Exorcism or whatever, as though it were a $1 billion production, and everyone is, worth all the money in the world, and you just give them the respect that they deserve, and you have a good time doing it, and they in turn kind of give you that same, respect and love back, and you make something that everyone is, 100% about.
I'm telling you, you need to do a self-help book or something.
Yeah.
These are just really good.
No, because I was a very negative person when things were going shitty, and like I said, you didn't become Stanley Kubrick or didn't make, Citizen Kane. Your expectations of your own talent and whatever those things are. Once I let that stuff go and just said, you know what, I like the Roger Corman model. Yeah. You make these things fast, you make them cheap, make them as good as you can with the best people that you can, and you just give it 100%, let it go and get it out there and see what happens, and don't let the negativity that might come from it, or even the positivity, infect you in any way. because you're down to make something even better because you learned from the mistakes on the previous. And don't get a big head or a big ego about this, because I've been at Sundance, I've been to Cannes, I've been to all these places with great movies playing, but it's all the same thing. Every studio or every distributor or even the audience is just looking for the next movie, the next thing. A year later you're forgotten about or you're remembered about, like The Exorcist or whatever it is, because they're masterpieces. Yeah. But for me, it's just about, maybe 50 years from now, one of these films will be, in the same regard as The Exorcist. You never know. You hope to, achieve that, but I don't pin my hopes and my dreams or, my depression or anxiety upon those.
And that's such a good attitude, because I've heard people always say, like, the director or who's ever at the top of the call sheet sets the tone for everyone else. So if you create a nice atmosphere, everyone wins.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's totally true. We're big slasher fans, big surprise, because I told you about Halloween. And so we really enjoyed your 2021 film Night Caller because, well, first it had a really scary killer. And also you really set up a great like final girl / heroine in Susan Priver. Is it Priver or Priver?
Priver's good.
Priver. Okay. Susan Priver's psychic character. I'll take everything. Of Clementine. We loved her. And now I saw that you made a sequel to Night Caller in 2023 called Scalper. So my question is, do you think there will be any additional installments centered around Clementine? Like, do you envision this being a full series?
Well, I think I would love to. It's kind of one of those things. If if a movie does well or whatever, and those unfortunately those two haven't done well.
Oh,
so it's getting the word out there, and for me it was making a modern day American giallo mixed with a little When a Stranger Calls, and certain things that influenced me from the 80s and slashers and Lucio Fulci and all these kind of things meshed into this neo noir kind of look of Nightcaller, and we had so much fun on that. And it was kind of like the sequel was ready to go because Susan Prever had such a good time on it. She was like, I would love to redo this character. And it was still kind of, well, we're not sure how Nightcaller is doing, but the money's there. Let's go make it. So we cranked out a sequel, and it was a great time, and I think a great movie. But it's just one of those things that is still yet to catch on. People have not been swarming to it. But if they started swarming to it now and to warrant a third one, then I would love to get into it.
Yeah, that's surprising, because it's like, as people who love like 80s slashers, especially, it's like the key components to a successful or a great 80s slasher is a great scary killer, usually a mass killer, and a really identifiable final girl type character that you really feel for and you root for. And you had both in this. So right. I'm surprised, but who knows? Sometimes it takes time for certain things to catch on. So we'll see, give it some time. You'll be 20 movies ahead by that time. But like, yeah.
But that's the other thing, you don't, I used to blame, it's a distributor's fault. They messed up. That's what they did. Or no, it's my fault. I fucked up. It's a piece of shit, but in reality, it's who knows? It's the timing. It's the whatever for a film that clicks with an audience, and then word of mouth or whatever, because, it used to be they'd throw, a movie in a drive-in for a week and it'd make billions of dollars, just, the worst, movie that you can imagine, but it had whatever, and the timing and it's just a different era, and finding that niche, whether it's in streaming mixed with, limited theatrical, and finding just that lightning in a bottle that makes it take off. And, you hope the best for each film, but, sometimes it doesn't hit that way. And I try to tell that to every investor, you got to make this for the love of it, and not, hoping that you're going to become a millionaire.
It's also must be so tough with just the oversaturation of films nowadays and streaming, like, between all of the different apps and channels and all of them making their own content. Like,
oh my gosh, like I feel bad for studios right now, because they don't know what will hit and what will. There's no guarantees anymore, and especially they're competing with someone who, like myself, I'm guilty. You can watch like 500 videos on TikTok and be equally as entertained as watching a movie.
Right. That's your reason that it wasn't successful. Tim Murdoch watching TikToks instead of movies.
Don't do TikTok. I'm the exception.
Yeah. We noticed that Ed Kemper was not your first time doing true crime, because you made the 2022 film Pig Killer that was inspired by serial killer Robert Willie Pickton. So my question for you, what is it about adapting true crime stories that appeals to you?
Oh, well, for me, the thing that I love the most about it is getting into a different era Whether on Pig Killer it was, the 80s into the 90s, it was a fun time just getting the wardrobe, the cars, all those things that, that I loved seeing when I lived through it. So getting in doing Ed Kemper was great because it was going into the 70s and, even the early 60s for his, when he was 15, and just getting the little bits and pieces. We had an amazing wardrobe department that got, vintage clothing all the way through for everyone. So when those actors would put it on and they'd come in and you're feeling the polyester shirt or the bell-bottom jeans, you're just like, oh, this is amazing, and you sit them in, a 1970 car and it's like, wow, I feel like it's, the correct period. And, everything just feels like a whole different, it feels like you've been transported back in time. So to me, that was the most fun in trying to pull that off and get that right for a nickel budget and shoot it in 10 days. So it's a fun thing to take your limitations and turn them into a positive, or make a film that's on $100,000 budget look like it's $1 million. It is always the reward for me.
And do you prefer doing true crime or fictional horror films?
Right now, true crime, because I think it just has, like I was saying with Nightcaller, that really kind of put me off on the whole thing because, whereas true crime, Pig Killer did really well. And, so it was that kind of, kicked me in the butt. And then the timing with a producer friend of mine, Mike Muscal, who had, worked on Reanimator, and he had produced, a slew of true crime films from Ted Bundy, Hillside Strangler, Ed Gein, with the writer Steven Johnson. He said he saw on Facebook that Pig Killer was getting all these rave reviews and doing all these, festivals, and it was getting released. And he said, boy, you seem pretty prolific at these films and whatever. What's your key to success? And I'm just like, make them fast, make them cheap, and, have fun doing it. And he's like, well, look, I've got a script, true crime script here laying around. Would you be interested in reading it? And I said, sure, send it over. And it happened to be Ed Kemper. And I'm just like, I knew of Ed Kemper from I had an encyclopedia of serial killers, growing up, and it listed every serial killer with a paragraph or two of what they did and all this stuff. And I remember Ed Kemper with the cutting his mother's head off and shoving her larynx down the garbage disposal, seeing the devil in the stove. I mean, certain things that clicked with me, and I remembered Ed Kemper and his story, so I immediately started reading it. It was good. Where most scripts people send you can't get 5 pages in. But this thing was a page turner. I got to the end of it and I said, look, the only problem is, again, we make these films for nothing. And the most I can offer you is, a couple pennies. And, we roll the dice and see how it turns out. And he said, we're up for that. Let's do it. We want to be in business with you. So got the script, did a pass on the script to kind of tone it down budget wise, because it had, it was a millions of dollar budget, because they were doing films with Lionsgate at that time. So it was kind of one of the scripts they were ready to pull the trigger on, but didn't. And so it kind of fell by the wayside 30 years ago now. And so when I got my hands on it, I just kind of toned down some of the budget aspects of it to fit the money we had, and beefed up the role with Susan Prever and Ed Kemper, the mother-son relationship, to kind of go that direction, having a dysfunctional childhood myself. So I was able to kind of relate to that story, because the best thing about writing of anything is finding something within yourself in a character to wrap your head around it and kind of walk that you have the same kind of shoes for a moment, whether it be, Ed Kemper's love of John Wayne or certain things you can relate to within a character is always easier for a writer to kind of dive into it. So once the script was ready, sent it to Susan, she loved it, and then started finding an Ed Kemper, and it just kind of started falling into place based on, the popularity of true crime. Because one of the things was, you just tell people, look at Dahmer on Netflix, look at Menendez Brothers. Those are going through the roof. They're the highest rated thing. And then people are like, oh, these are valuable. Here, how much do you need? Take it,
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of answered our next couple questions with that. No, I appreciate it, because we were going to ask how you got involved. Just so listeners know, well, first off, I just want to repeat that Ed Kemper was just released in select theaters on April 4th and on VOD on April 8th. And for listeners who aren't familiar with Ed Kemper, I'll just give you a quick little summary of him. Basically, he first killed his own grandparents when he was 15, was sent to a state hospital for 6 years, was released at age 21, and then ended up killing 8 people in the early 70s. He was nicknamed the co-ed killer because many of his victims were college-age girls. I was going to ask, like, what made you choose him, but it sounds like the kind of script came to you specifically. It had already been written, and since you had done Pig Killer, it sounds like that's was kind of something that you were looking into, doing true crime. Did you do any other independent like research of your own on Ed Kemper, or was kind of the script already there with all the info you needed?
No, that was one of the, the great things. He had done most of the heavy lifting. That his facts were 100% because I researched everything about it, re-researched everything on the internet, and read a couple more of the serial killer books I have to just kind of refresh myself with the case. He had the names right, the dates right, the mode of death correct. Every little detail was in there, and then a few things that weren't, like the 15-year-old girl that he picks up at the bus stop. It wasn't in the script that she opened the car door and everything once he locked himself out. So that was a factual thing that had happened, that I re-put that in because it's so unbelievable that she did that. But at the same time, it was true, so I put that in the script. Things like the FBI agent wrestler at the end, I took verbatim the dialogue that they had from the transcript of ripping your head off, popping your like a grape, all these things that were actually the dialogue that they said between each other. I put into the script. Certain things I tried to be as accurate as possible, but there's so many other things that in his life when you read up about it or watch his interviews, because he was so forthcoming with not only the FBI and helping them catch serial killers, but he was also very open to the press and people who wanted to talk about it, and he admitted fully to his crimes and kind of owned up to it. And that's one thing that you got to give a guy respect, instead of like a Ted Bundy who kind of, I was a nice guy. I didn't, whereas, Ed Kemper, he laid it all out, and it's one of the interesting facts about him. He even read audiobooks for the blind when he was in prison. I mean, he's tried to become, a positive force in society as much as he can be, I guess.
Wow, I didn't know that about him. So there's something I've always wondered when adapting like true crime stories into movies, and it's been done a lot, but like, so do you take a documented event like you read about or hear about, like one of the killers or something, and just kind of imagine what the dialogue would have been like that led up to it happening? Or how do you go about deciding on like what the characters are going to say, since you know what happened, but obviously you don't know what to say? Are you just guessing or taking based on like hearing other people's accounts? How does that work?
I think, well, it's a little of both. You take, as much as you can that's out there, whether it's interviews or books that are written about. I'm working on Richard Ramirez, The Night Stalker now, and it's one of those things that the book I'm reading, it has, like 1,000 hours of interviews with Richard Ramirez, and a lot of the details are very specific of what happened, and the rapes and the murder and all these things, and you just kind of try to go through that and get it right. Of what you put your mind in that position of. The thing that makes it harder is that it really happened, so you really it kind of hits you. It's a queasier feeling than just coming up with some Lovecraft monsters or whatever it might be, or it gets in the back of your head and kind of makes your hair stand up on end when you hear the things that he did and the smells that were there, and you kind of get into this thing of which is a good point with remembering Quest for Fire and the feeling that I had in the theater at a young age, which I can now relate to feelings that Richard Ramirez had, which now is the one way I'm trying to connect myself to him, which is very hard because he's a very fucked up individual, whereas Ed Kemper was a smart motherfucker with 140 IQ. I mean, this guy you could really hear from, but Richard Ramirez, it's more of this sadomsexual messed up stuff. And he specifically, one of the major imprints on him was he was 12 years old and he was over at his cousin's house, and his cousin was a Green Beret in Vietnam. He did 2 tours, 29 confirmed, kills in Vietnam. He was a war hero. I mean, big time. It's like John fucking Rambo is your cousin, and he's over there visiting him. And, his eyes are bright. He loves this guy. I mean, this guy is a hero. He's just, did all this stuff. But his cousin was also, a sadistic, murderous motherfucker. So he would take these women out of these, villages, take them out into the jungle, rape them, murder them, dismember them, take pictures with a Polaroid, and he took probably 40, 50 women that he did this to with a shoebox full of these pictures. And he brought them home after the war, and he would regale young 12-year-old Richard Ramirez with these war stories and these rape stories, and showing him these pictures at a young, 12-year-old boy who's, kind of discovering his sexuality and all this stuff, and hearing that. And, and then at one of the point, Richard's over there playing miniature pool with him, and, they're talking and they're whatever. Richard's like, it's a hot day in El Paso, Texas. And he's like, hey, can I get a Coke out of the fridge? Sure, go ahead. He goes into the refrigerator, and there's a .38 revolver in the refrigerator. And he's like, Mike, why is your gun in the fridge, man? Because it's cool out, and because it keeps it cool. I don't know when I'm going to be using it next on these hot days. So the wife later comes home. Richard's there playing pool, and she starts nagging at Mike. Mike goes to the kitchen, grabs the gun, and he points it at her head, and he says, say one more thing. Fuck you. And he pulls the trigger, blows her face off. Falls dead on the floor. Richard witnesses all of this, and and he remembers specifically the smells of the blood, the sweat, these certain things just vivid in his mind. And the cousin's like, Richard, you were never here. Go on home. Don't say a word. And it's just these things where you're like, okay, me seeing Quest for Fire with my dad and the blood and the guts remembers, and the popcorn smell and the stuff. So I can now relate to how that would make that makes a minor imprint on me. But the death of someone right in front of you, the blood, the gunshot, the smoke, made such an impact on, young Richard Ramirez. So it's
in your research, do you ever get nightmares, or do you take it?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, I can only imagine.
This specifically has been one of the hardest things I've ever written, just because it's the book, is very detailed. It's very, it's very similar to In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, where, they talk to the actual criminals and they get in their head for a moment, and then they write it out. And then, when you read it, you can really visualize it, you can feel it. And that's, one of the hardest things of bringing a script to screen that is such a deplorable killer, that it's very hard, because I don't want to do to the detective angle, because that's been done. So it's trying to do it from Richard's angle, and getting elements like the interaction with his cousin, or, the head trauma he had at a young age, or, the molestation, certain things that you can try to not give sympathy to him, but give a reason of, oh, that could be one of the reasons that, led to this. Same thing with Ed Kemper. Is his mother all at fault? No. There's blame on everyone involved with these situations, whether it's the parents, whether it's the killer, whether it's, even the victims in a small way, especially with Ed Kemper. I mean, why the hell did those girls get in the car with this guy? I understand it was a different time, but at the same time, I'm like, it's hard to imagine, someone, being 6'9" and, 350 pounds. I mean, he must have had a silver tongue to these chicks to hop on in,
Hitchhiking is a fascinating thing.
Yeah, I know nowadays.
Never. I mean, we have Ubers. So.
Everything you said, I just, so many questions arise. Like, how do you, Chad, detach yourself from these sadistic situations that you were constantly researching and writing about, for these last couple years? Do you do you take frequent breaks, vacation? No, but seriously, since you have now been focused on true crime, from Ed Kemper to Richard Ramirez, Dorothea Puente, how do you detach yourself from this?
Do you watch the Golden Girls?
So
I love Golden Girls.
But what do you do to clear your mind from this so that it doesn't take its toll on you?
I watch a lot of old game shows and a lot of old cartoons. They've got the MeTV Cartoon Network thing that's on, and this is, regular TV. That's one thing I will say, with when digital television and the digital antennas came in, it really because I'm not a cable guy, I'm not a streaming guy, I'm an old fashioned 3-channel dude, with a tube TV. And when they got the digital TV, so many great channels, Movies Channel, Me TV, all these certain things, the game show, Buzzer Channel, all these things that came out that you're like, oh man, I can watch, a Match Game all day long from 1978. I mean, so I'm able to kind of get out of, this darkness and kind of go, it's like, boy, people were cool in 1978 and the great clothing and they're smoking and they're whatever. So I'm kind of able to step away from it, but it does get, I've never, the Richard Ramirez one is the hardest one to tackle for sure. It's just very,
dark.
Again, it's dark and there's really the redeeming quality. The redeeming thing for me is the period, again, 1984 and 85 is really exciting to get that down in Los Angeles. The heat, because it was during the summer and it was a record heat wave, and little moments like the Ray Bradbury short story. I can't remember the name of it, but I just remembered, violence happens over 92 degrees. That was one thing that I remembered from his short story, and interweaving that into the film because it was all like 94, 95 degree temperatures that he was killing these people in. So, little things that kind of bring me a connection outside of the true element, but within, whether it's cinema in Ed Kemper of putting, an old commercial or an old movie or the John Wayne clips. It's certain things that kind of bring a lightness for it to me in there that connects it to cinematically with the things I love, that kind of takes the darkness a little, it shades it off a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, no matter what, it's a heavy subject, so you're gonna it's a tough balance.
It's funny you mentioned, when you mentioned the Night Stalker, probably the only serial killer that I ever, and I've mentioned this on the podcast, have any memory connection to, because I grew up when I was 4 years old in 84. My family was living in Duarte, California, which is right near where all the murders took place. And I have vivid memories of my mom saying, we have to keep the outside light on and windows and stuff locked, because he doesn't come into houses where like the door's locked and the light is on or something like that. But I just remember thinking, keep that light on so the Night Stalker won't come. Like, I remember that as a kid. So It's just crazy when you met, like, anytime I hear the Night Stalker, I have those memories of, because the only serial killer I ever lived near, but there was an actual threat to everyone in the area. They just thought, who is he going to strike next? And I remember thinking, he usually goes for old ladies, so I'm okay. Like, I mean, it's crazy, but like, anyway, it's just, you're giving me weird memories. Back to Ed Kemper. There'll be one thing I noticed. Ed Kemper in your film was played by Brandon Kirk, and his abusive mother was played by Susan Prever. And now both of these stars have been in multiple movies that you've made, and I noticed that that's pretty common for you, that you stick a lot with the same actors. What kind of advantages do you find from working with the same group of actors?
Well, they're going to show up. They're going to know their lines. They're not going to complain. They're going to, be, and they just, it kind of turns it into a family reunion kind of thing for each of these movies. You get with the same crew and the same cast. And if a new person, actor or actress comes in, you're kind of like, hey, welcome to the fold. And they turn out, and then you use them again and again, because they're not only good, but they're good people. And it's just finding that, and the same kind of, attitude is just key for these, low budgets, fast shoots, is just finding people who are, game and have a good time doing it, and, are as thrilled making it as you are. Because if you get one person who's just like, I hate being here, whatever, it's just a negativity that just is infectious. So if you get everyone who's positive about it, and then it makes it everyone its job a lot easier, because they're all kind of just saying, okay, we got to get this done. And, we'll do the best we can, and, buck up if it's hot out or the food stinks or whatever it might be. And, you put on a smile and have a good energy. And Susan and Brandon are great. Robert Miano, all these people that I've worked with, Sylvia Spross, people who I've worked with for years and have just a great rapport with, a kind of a shorthand of a directing style. They know what I want, or they know what I've in, or I just have to say, nah, bring it down a little, and they nail it in one or two takes. And you just move on, because it's, again, shooting these things very fast, and where you have to do, 10 to 15 pages a day. and you want people who aren't going to be a prima donna or aren't going to complain or aren't going to say, oh, I'm not showing up tomorrow. That's the hardest thing, especially with Ed Kemper, is we auditioned like 20 different guys, and each time you'd go, well, there's going to be nudity and it might get very graphic and very violent, and make sure you're not going to have a problem with that. And most of them would kind of hem and haw. Yeah, I'm fine. It'll be fine. And then you're like, okay, forget that guy. And so, knowing Brandon, working with him previously, I still had him audition, put on four different, scenes and put it on tape and showing it to everyone. And, his performance rose to the top. And I knew, this guy is, the guy. And I knew he would have no problem with any of the scenes, and he would be willing to, sleep on the floor of each location or whatever it be, just to have this opportunity. And he was great.
That's great.
Also starring in your film is Slumber Party Massacre star Miss Stevens. Her first
Brink.
name. Thank you.
Brink Stevens. Yeah. Miss Stevens.
Yeah.
Good old Miss Stevens from the Slumber Party Massacre.
Yeah, I love her performance in that. How did she get involved in your project?
Oh, she's fantastic. Joe Castro has, been friends and worked with her for, years and years and years. And he recommended her. I knew of her work and, always was a fan. But, seeing he had a direct contact, and I'm like, oh, my God, that makes it so much easier. And I'm like, send her the script, see if she's interested in the role of Sally. And she loved the script. And I said, well, I hate to do this. You're going to have to put it on tape because some of the investors, they just want to be fair to everyone who's, auditioning and trying to get the role, that if she wouldn't mind doing it. And she's like, of course not. I'd be happy to. And that right there is a great thing, a good sign of, a game player. And she put it on tape and she blew everyone away. She was fantastic and, amazing actress not only on set, but a great personality. And, I just worked with her again on Dorothea, and she was, again, phenomenal. She's really, top notch.
That's great. And I mean, I know it's like, for us horror nerds, like you get the name and we remember her from these movies. I know you're just looking for the best person for the part, but like obviously, it comes with some credibility when there's like, oh my God, I know Brink Stevens kind of thing like that. Yeah. Okay, so I have two questions for you about Ed Kemper's mom. Not the actress who played her, Susan Prever, but like how she's portrayed in the movie versus like the real life mom. So was she really as abusive and horrible as she was portrayed in the film? Like, is that based on real life stuff? Because I mean, obviously it's not reason to commit murder, but like you were saying with Richard Ramirez, like it's not a coincidence that so many of these serial killers came from awful upbringings.
Right. Well, that's the thing. And yes, her abuse is probably even worse. I mean, there was, especially at, his younger age, but I think once he was older, it just kind of turned into more of, diminishing his manhood and all these things. And then, the childhood. But yeah, no, she was abusive from the get-go because, a lot of resentment for his father. And, that kind of, laid onto him. So she was quite the monster. But again, not like you said, it's not any reason for him to go and kill, eight co-eds. But it was one of those things where, again, bad timing and the bad circumstances and bad, whatever it is, just kind of meet in the middle, and they, transform someone into a serial killer or a Hitler or whatever it might be. You never know. I don't think you can definitely point your finger at one thing specifically that caused it, but in his case, the mother was definitely a major part of his issues. And but I think also the way that she treated the sisters, she treated them very well, and him. So it was kind of this jealousy, and she had was worried from him at a very young age with the cat killing. That's a factual. And the way he looked at his sisters. I mean, there were certain things where she was, on edge and locking him in the basement to keep him away from them. And that had just such a hideous effect on him psychologically, and especially him being such a smart guy. that he's able to overanalyze these things at a young age and get, maybe compulsive about thoughts about it, especially sexually, and, turn those into such a horrible thing,
I was shocked that he went back after prison, back to the mom.
Yeah, the first thing they say is don't go to your mother.
Okay, I guess. But you also said he was a very smart guy, so maybe he thought he could manipulate her or control her. I don't know. I was just
I think, he actually really loved her and wanted to see if he can fix things, or maybe they'd be different now. I think that's a big part of it. Our parents, even if they're negative or positive, have such an effect at a young age that even if it's abusive, you want to have a connection to them because you love them no matter how awful they are most of the time.
What's that called? Stockholm syndrome?
Well, yeah, it's like, why do people stay in abusive relationships?
Sure.
Like, for when you're on the outside, it's easy to say, why don't you leave them? But like, don't even want to jump into this.
I know that's 5 podcasts.
That's another podcast. So one other question about
and these seeds are so implanted at such a young age, and that's the best way to put it, of whether your hate for her is so, whatever she, maybe she may locked you in a closet, maybe she took away your Game Boy, whatever it might have been that planted a seed of such rage, and then it went away and it got better and got better, and then 30 years later you're in a room and then it clicks back to you and you snap and you kill her, or whatever it might be. These things, it's hard to tell. The mind is really such an amazing thing of what it represses or what it holds or whatever, when you bring up a thing, the same thing with the smell, and now I'm just connecting that so much with the Quest for Fire and Richard Ramirez that I'm like, I can totally understand how these things stick in your back of your head or whatever it would be, and a certain smell or a certain thing makes it go off, and it's like, oh my God, I was molested by a priest back in 1970, and it's like, oh my God, and you go out and you kill a priest, all these things that who knows what triggers these things in our head.
The human mind is something movies will always like. We'll always have enough material to make, because there's just we'll never know what's going on up here.
And it's also scary because I always think, like, is there going to be someday I wake up and remember something crazy? I would hope not, but
wonderful childhood.
Tim, what did you do to me? No. Anyway, okay, so we may be way off on this, Chad, but like, I do have to ask, because we both kind of got a vibe that there may have been something more than friendship going on between Ed's mother and her friend Sally. Now, were we way off on that, or was that intended?
No, totally intended. It was one of those great things of when I went through the script and reworked a lot of the scenes. That was one of the things, because I, watched a lot of Ed Kemper, his prison interviews recently, and just got refreshed with everything. And I remember a comment that he said was, my mother and Sally they seemed more than friends, because she was so upset when Sally didn't go on the trip with her that she went anyway, but she was just like, what? And he remembered saying to her, why are you so upset? She just canceled out on you. And, there was, and it dawned on him. It's like, oh, I think there's something more. And I think that's another thing of, where she was, repressing her urges, her lesbianism, because it was wrong to be gay then, especially, and you were, ostracized. So she had to keep it hidden and whatever. So that was one of the things that I kind of felt bad for her. And I could kind of understand that she, hates whatever Ed Kemper, maybe the father was, her husband, Ed Kemper's father, sexually, raped her if she didn't have the, there's so many things that you kind of like think it's like, okay, so she's not 100% a monster. I try to get into her head as well, and having this thing, she's, living a whole life that's not her own, really. She wants to be with a woman. She wants to have these things. She doesn't want, these things. And she kind of just, changed her life, be married, have a husband, the picket fence, and all these things. And those are repressions of what she really wants, a love that was forbidden. I mean, those are certain things I can't know for sure, but I know the certain things that Ed said in this interview makes you think the mother had serious sexual issues going on that she wasn't able to confront. And having a friend like Sally and someone she could confide in or go on trips or have, sex with, or whatever it might be, was one of those things that she had to kind of keep a secret. And, Ed getting onto that was one of the things I added in, of the comments that he makes to her, that, you're more than friends, or, she has a sharp tongue, or what, certain things that I'm like, oh, that's so good. And it's just a little subtle thing. And if people pick up on it like you, great. And that's totally intended,
Perfect. Yeah. No, we definitely did. But we kept like turning to each other. We're like, is something else going on here?
Well, yeah. I was like, why is she so mad? It's like,
and it was like she always wanted to like talk with her in private. It was just so yes, it definitely came across. Something that took things in a slightly kind of supernatural direction was when Ed, as a child, he sees like visions of this devil-like figure when he's locked in the basement. Was that just meant to kind of like reflect his descent into evil, or what was that character meant to represent?
No, it was one of those things, again, I read in the encyclopedia that he, saw or heard voices or the devil within a stove in the basement he was locked in, or whether at the furnace or whatever, something within the door. He would see this figure outline and it would tell him things. And it was something that I just remembered and kind of glapsed onto and kind of built that up within the script, that it manifests into, him seeing this devil, or it's filling his head, and he tries to block it out as long as he can, but at a certain point he just kind of accepts it and lets it in.
Also, throughout the film, Ed has hallucinations of John Wayne. What made you add that element?
He was a huge John Wayne fan. I mean, just
the Duke.
Loved the Duke and loved his movies, and wanted to emulate him. And it was one of those things that I'm also a John Wayne fan, because I love all westerns. And it's one of those things, it's my dream genre to get it to make. I have numerous scripts, and it's just something that is just so manly. And for someone who's berated by his mother, but not being manly and being, less than a man, John Wayne was the ultimate father figure to him. And I think that's, something that just needed to be in there. And my knowledge of public domain and certain films that you can use, and The Angel and the Bad Man is a film that's in public domain starring John Wayne, and it was just a no-brainer to add that into the film. And the posters in the background and certain things that if I were Ed Kemper and I were a John Wayne fan, I'd have posters of whatever. So it's putting the writer and the director, myself, into the shoes of a character. And it's like, okay, if he's a John Wayne fan, he'd have posters, he'd have a knowledge of the lines and of movies, and you'd kind of just interweave that into the film. And the fact that he actually in true life was a fan, it made it easier.
Yeah. You touched upon this earlier, and probably the murder I was the most fascinated by, because I just couldn't believe it. And you mentioned this, was the girl that he picks up. And at first I thought he was imagining it, but when he gets locked out of the car and she's inside the car with his gun, and rather than trying to get away or using it on him, she ends up doing everything he says and letting him back in, and then he kills her. And so you're saying, so this was documented, this was based on all true events?
Yes.
Wow.
It was one of those messed up things that that I can only, she was 15 years old, young, and just, he was very charming and had a charisma, a magnetism, same as Richard Ramirez, same as Ted Bundy. When you see them in interviews, they have a certain magnetism. It's almost a movie star quality, or a politician. I mean, there's certain, they give off something, whether it's good, bad, or whatever, there's something there. And I think, she, again, being young, and he maybe, his energy was deceiving her in a sense, because she thought maybe he's just kidding around, because there was, in the original script, it was written that he rapes her, she's alive, she's hitting him, she's doing it was a normal thing. And then when the actress that was originally going to play that role is like, I'm not getting raped in the backseat of a car and doing all this stuff and whatever. So, but she was really a good actress, and I wanted to use her. So I started researching that death, and I'm like, oh, he didn't rape the alive girl. All these girls that he raped and murdered or whatever, they were already dead before he had any sex with them. So that made it easier to tell the actress, don't worry, he's not going to rape you alive. You're going to be dead.
Oh my God.
And, but
what an awkward conversation to have.
Researching the coup, Kia Coup is her name, her murder, it was basically, it went into great detail, his retelling of it, that she, once he was testing the tape on her mouth, and all this stuff. She was very, docile and open to it, and even cracking some jokes. And everything that happened is the way it went down. And then the fact that when he locked himself in the car with the gun on the front seat and she's in the back and he can't get in, and they just shared a look and she opened the door and let him back in. It's crazy.
Wow. Yeah, that's when because I just couldn't believe that would happen. But you're right. There's certain people, especially if you're very young, where maybe you were terrified and you don't know what else to do. It's like the fight or flight.
Right. Oh my gosh. I mean, but as a child, and I think I trusted all authority, and I think that's the scary part.
Sure.
Yeah. Overall, what was your favorite scene in the movie? Either because it was your favorite to film or just because of how it turned out. Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I think, when Clarnell, Susan Prever, goes to his door when he's in his room and she, is drunk and she's in the stockings and the nightie and she's getting all sexy after, telling him that John Wayne would fuck her, and and then she starts doing, Streetcar Named Desire and lines from, plays, which are certain things that I added because the actress Susan Prever does a lot of theater. And I know that she's huge on, Streetcar and, Death of a Salesman and certain things. So interweaving those into her character for me was one of those things. Okay, this is what an actor can connect to, especially she's big to stage. So it's not just a drunk, abusive mother. It's, look, she's got a love for theater. She's done these things. And when she came out and, kind of let it all out and she was free and whatever, and, half naked and wearing the sexy lingerie and grabbing her tits and drunk and, telling her son that, John Wayne would fuck her is a great moment because I had not seen or rehearsed any of that. And then when she comes out in the outfit that I hadn't seen before, and she gave 110%, and I knew, right then and there, I'm like, okay, she's going to play Dorothea in the next film. So it's certain things that, you remember as a moment. Not only is cinematically is a great moment, but for me, everything kind of aligned, and it was like, okay, this paid off not only for the actor and the character, but for me as a writer, and it felt good.
I just thought of something as we were saying this, because Ed Kemper, the real life Ed Kemper, is still alive in prison, correct?
Yes.
And you said that he's big on press. Had you ever considered going to actually talk with him in person, or would that have even been allowed? Or
no, I had Brandon Kirk, who plays Ed Kemper, write him a letter and to see if he'd be interested in looking at the film, because we'd love to get a quote to put on the Blu-ray, and Kemper gives it 2 thumbs up.
Did he respond, or
he just sent it a couple weeks ago, so hopefully there'll be. That might be a little morbid, but
Wow, the real life killer says 2 thumbs up. You really portrayed those murders well.
I'm frozen.
Wow. So like I mentioned in the intro, and you've talked about throughout, I read that you have not one but 2 additional true crime thrillers on the way. One based on serial killer Dorothea Puente, and one based on the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. So what can you tell us about, when do you are these, what stages are these films are at? When do you think they'll be coming out? What can you tell us about those 2 coming up?
Dorothea was just delivered to Dredd, who's putting out Ed Kemper. They're also going to put out Dorothea this year, probably in a few months. And we're shooting Richard Ramirez, Night Stalker, in July, so this year. And hopefully that'll come out in, either end of this year, October, December, or early next year.
Wow. So you're saying you could have 3 movies out in the same year?
No, I do. I've got, my Lovecraft film, Unspeakable Beyond the Wall of Sleep with Eddie Furlong, came out this year. So did Ed Kemper, and so will Dorothea. So 3 films already this year.
I feel lazy.
If Night Stalker gets done, gets out at the end of this year, it'd be 4 films in a year, which would be monumental for me. So I would be thrilled.
Oh my God. I also saw on IMDb, it said that you're in pre-production for a film called Horse, where a gunfighter seeks revenge on the men who murdered his horse. What is that? When is this coming, or have you already written, or what?
That's my dream Western. I wrote the script 10 years ago, and it's really my passion, ultimate King of the Hill kind of film. So it's funding came and went numerous times, but it's it's in the back burner that hopefully it'll get made someday.
Overall, what do you like most about making horror films or true crime films or just films in general?
I think it's just, the freedom of, anytime, when you're alone or you're with a friend and you see a movie then it just pulls you in. And, that's what making movies to me is. It's this energy and this fun of just being able to make something that either I love and you hope an audience loves, but it boils down to me, and I love doing and seeing what I'm making. And it's just a vicious circle of, this wanting to just keep creative and keep busy and keep making things that, that I personally want to see,
Yeah, wow. I mean, you were definitely keeping busy. You can say that. I mean, can't wait to see what else just in the next couple years. I mean, if you are working this quickly now, I just can't even imagine it. But that's great. You're doing what you love and you're doing a lot of it and you're working with people that you enjoy working with. Like, what more can you ask for from life, right?
Right. No, that's it.
A nap.
A nap. Yeah. Well, so we have one final question for you, Chad, that we ask every single person at the end of our interview, and it kind of puts you on the spot. But and I don't know how many interviews you've done specifically for Ed Kemper so far, or if you're about to start, but what is one thing that you can tell us about your experience working on Ed Kemper that you have never told any other interviewer, publication, or podcaster to date? Just one thing. I mean, it can be really salacious or it can be just a random thing, but something you have never told any other interviewer or podcaster about your experience working on Ed Kemper.
Wow. Gosh. Wow.
Think deep into all of that filmmaking of that.
I guess it would be, we were having a casting session, and one of the girls that was for the Koo character, the 15-year-old bus stop, she was outside. I was outside smoking for a break. And she comes out and she's like, "Oh, I really, 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 really want this role. I'm going to be great at this role. Oh, please, please give me this role." And I'm like, "Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, you did a great audition, and I got to catch my bus." And she runs to get her bus. And I'm like, "Oh, that's nice that she took a bus all the way out here. She gave a great audition." And, I finished my cigarette and I go back in and I'm like, "Hey, she was great. Let's get her, and let's cast her." They call her up and she's like, "Okay, this is, you made my day. This is so exciting. This is so great." And, she was just ecstatic over the phone that she got this role. And then, a week before shooting, my producer, Jeff Olin, calls up and he's like, "Chad, I'm sorry. She just canceled." Well, to be honest, her manager canceled because, it's not, union, there were issues, there's all these things. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? This girl was so excited and whatever. But someone, in her inner circle or whatever it would be, dissuaded, and that's a thing I think that happens with a lot of people, even with reviews. People will, "I love this movie. This was great." And then they go on and they see these negative reviews and they're like, "I'm not going to say anything." It's a shift in, and I always say, go with your gut and the feeling that you have. If you like something or you want to do something, just do it. Don't listen to anyone else, and that was one of the things she missed out big time. I mean, and maybe not. Maybe it's something she doesn't even want to be involved with. I don't know. But in the positive end, the girl that took her place, Erin Liu, is phenomenal. I mean, she, get on the floor, get on the ground, and take off your clothes, and then get in the trunk of the car and let him rape you. No problem, whatever, you got it. And with a smile on her face. So, I guess it was meant to be. But it's one of those things where I know that first girl really wanted this and was so excited and so onto it until someone said, "You shouldn't do this. Why would you do this? Why would you?" And it planted a seed again where they now saw something instead. If they would have just went for their gut. Don't let anyone tell you you're not talented. Don't let anyone tell you you're ugly. Just go with yourself and your own feelings, and you'll succeed in this life.
Wow. Yeah. It's so funny that you say that. First off, thank you for sharing that with us. That is when we talk to a lot of horror stars who were in movies from, 30, 40 years ago, and we ask them like, why didn't you come back for the sequel? And we hear so often, it's like, oh, my manager said, I should try something different. I shouldn't do it. And then they tell us that today they really regret that they didn't do it because like their legacy, I'm thinking of like Amy Steele with
absolutely.
Friday the 13th.
She was like, I should have done part 3.
Yeah. They wanted her to be in part 3. I don't know if you're a Friday fan, but like, yeah. So one of the greatest final girls, and she told us even in our interview they had a script for her. They were going to continue her character, which would have been so amazing. The script sounded great, and like someone told her, or
too many cooks.
Yeah, someone told her, and she didn't take it, and she regrets it. And so many people, I feel like, do that, and where someone tells them this isn't the right move for you. So that's a great comment, and we do hear that more often than not.
More television.
Yeah. Oh, you need to move into rom-coms or something. Yeah.
But anyway. Rom-coms. Would you ever direct a romantic comedy?
Sure. There's certain things that I can, like I said, film noir, western, sci-fi. I love all that stuff. Naked Gun. I mean, anything. Zucker Brothers. All this stuff that, I would love to try if the script's right and the timing's right and the people involved are right. It's never say never to anything. You might have the time of your life, or find something you like even better to do. You never know, and I'm always open to try it or see what happens. It all goes around to the people you're working with. If it's a fun group of people and a good energy, and they're helping the creative process by great ideas or whatever, and making just a very enthusiastically refreshing experience, then I'm pretty much up for anything.
Wow, I'm seeing a Chad Ferrin rom-com in 2026.
That's right.
Now we're talking.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thank you so much. We really enjoyed chatting with you. I think you're such an inspiration for, I think, filmmakers, for horror lovers, and we can't wait to see what comes from you in the next maybe 3 months. So
I hope you get a nap. I mean, you probably work from like 7 in the morning to like 7 the next day?
No, it's like 10 to 10.
That's a long day.
10 to 10. It was like 10 to 12.
I was like, listen, when do I get my 3-hour lunch?
Well, yeah, we've really enjoyed chatting with you. We'll definitely stay in touch. Everyone, either try to catch Ed Kemper in theater near you or on demand. And yeah, thank you so much. And we wish you nothing but the best.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, guys. You were amazing. And I hope we do this again, especially on Dorothea right around the corner.
That's awesome. Okay, well, take care. We'll chat with you soon.
Congratulations.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Happy Horror Time.
If you'd like to support the podcast, please sign up to be a patron at www.patreon.com/happyhorrortime. As a patron, you get access to all our bonus content, which now includes 2 new bonus episodes every month, a monthly after show mini episode, access to our Discord community so you can chat with us directly, and the chance to review a film with us in one of our bonus episodes.
Patrons also get all our regular episodes ad-free and a day early, our monthly newsletter, the chance to vote in polls, and autographed Happy Horror Time stickers.
I'm Matt Emmert.
And I'm Tim Murdoch.
And we hope you have a happy horror time.